Today's episode of Voiced is from r/Petty Revenge and is about a granddaughter who discovered her grandmother had left her with an unexpected debt. What do you think she did next? Subscribe if you enjoy.
So I don't know the full story, but I do know the gist of it. My grandma raised her kids with love. She practically spoiled them, and she raised her grandkids too, me and my two sisters. Two of them, my uncle and my dad, became addicts, and the last, my aunt, became estranged. I've got tons of relatives, so I don't know if I've ever met her. If I have, I don't remember her face or name, so let's call her Little Miss J. J left without looking back and constantly asked my grandmother for money. She hardly repaid Grandma, which was a big mistake, because surprise, surprise, my grandma was on top of every penny that she had. She was the best I've ever seen when it came to handling funds. But 2 years ago, my grandmother was diagnosed with cancer. She worked extremely hard her whole life, was the strongest woman on the planet, and nobody got by without paying her their dues. Eventually, my grandmother passed away. In her will, she gives money to my grandfather, my dad, my uncle, me, and my sisters. Everyone in her family. When it comes to Jay, she says, "You still owe me $14. I do not know if she actually somehow owed Jay $14 in a will or just put it in there as a little slap in the face. All Jay was worried about when Grandma died was the money, and she got none of it. I can't be prouder to have a grandma that wouldn't leave this world without the last laugh. Jay needed my grandmother's money constantly. My grandmother was a great woman and a great mother to me. She raised me well. She raised 3 kids that were hers and 3 kids that weren't. The kids that were hers turned into drug addicts. The 3 kids that weren't turned into people who could handle their emotions and found therapy for themselves. I think it was a generational problem rather than the bad parenting she's being accused of. She was the kindest woman I'd ever met, but also the strongest. All 3 of us are getting therapy for things that aren't related to my grandmother. My uncle, my dad, and my aunt are not. Do we not think that maybe the generational differences of people who were often not given needed resources and people with the technology to find needed resources might be a factor in how they handled their mental illnesses? I should have expected the Reddit community would react like this, but I still feel the need to clarify. None of you know my life simply from the paragraphs written here. I have a long history, and the memories of my grandmother are the only good ones I have. None of the drug addicts in my family, not my mom, not my dad, not my other grandma, not the aunt I do know, not my uncle, not one member of my family has spoken ill about how my grandmother treated her kids. In fact, they've spoken highly of her parenting. It will be a cold day in hell when I let chronically online know-it-alls attempt to change my memory of my grandmother into something she was not. She was an honorable woman, and she is not responsible for the mistakes her children made when faced with an opioid crisis. I know that my dad was long out of the house before he got hooked on drugs, and he is now diagnosed with anxiety. If you'd like to continue blaming my grandma, I'd love to see how you believe she affected the other half of my family who were the same way. A leading cause of addiction is genetics and mental and emotional disorders. Anxiety can be an inherited condition that probably went untreated, as my grandmother was also a very anxious person. What I know is, my grandmother did not work her butt off to be a good person, just for a bunch of self-important prigs to insult her. Bottom line, you don't know my life, I do. This was a funny story because everyone in the family knows Jay is an unpleasant individual.
Wow, talk about a grandma who knew how to leave a lasting impression. It's amazing how she managed to keep track of every penny and even had a final joke up her sleeve. But now, let's switch gears completely. Imagine living in a beautiful old manor with ancient trees that add significant value to your property. Sounds idyllic, right? Well, hold on to your hats because the next story is about to take a dramatic turn.
It has been 2 years, and I can finally post about this. This is juicy, so get ready. Background information. We live in an old and big manor that has been split into 3 attached houses. The houses are about 150 years old and were built around 5 huge giant sequoias, which were about 200 years old. In the UK, giant sequoias are very rare, and the 2 in our garden increased the house price by about $60,000. We lived next to 2 really nice neighbors, one young couple and one old couple. The story. Unfortunately, our old neighbors passed away, so their child and her family moved in. Let's call her Jo. Jo was instantly a pain. We had been sharing chickens with the previous neighbors, and Jo agreed to keep sharing them. However, on her nights, she would constantly forget to put them away, so we would have to check them every night anyway. One night, her little brats thought it would be funny to open our personal duck pen in the night, which led to a mass slaughter. Later, the chickens went the same way. About 2 years ago, there was a storm, and one of her sequoias somehow fell over and died. They were distraught, understandably, But from then on, the jealousy started. She would constantly complain about how lucky we were to have 2 sequoias in our garden and how our sequoia was making too much shade in their garden. Anyway, we just thought it was Joe being a pain. There were a few dry threats like, they will chop it down. Or maybe the next storm will blow it down. Until we came back from a holiday to France to find a huge 6-meter stump and nothing else. I mean, how the heck do you get rid of a 100-foot tree in like 2 weeks? 2 of our old British oak trees had been crushed as well. My mom and sisters were crying, my dad was red in the face, and we had no evidence that Joe had done it. She claimed that there had been a storm and she had to get rid of it. We had a security camera at the front of the house, but you can get in the back if you go through a few fields. We then were given an 8,000-pound bill for damages to her property and to have the tree chopped up and removed. The wood alone would have been worth a small fortune. We had lost all hope, and 2 weeks had passed when my dad came running in from the garden. We had put up a wildlife camera a few months ago and had caught everything. We got a lawyer on the phone and started our revenge. We got a tree surgeon out who said it was an original specimen brought into the UK in 1860, along with the 2 that were in Elvaston Castle Country Park. There were 218 around the UK, but only 60 now. He also told us to call out an engineer because the roots might be in the foundation, so when they rot, it could damage the house. It turns out we would need to redo the foundations. Then we took Joe to court and sued them for damage to property, trespassing, and lots of other smaller claims. The tree would cost $250K to have another sequoia that was 200 years old put in and looked after. It's basically impossible, plus the damage to the foundation, which was $200K, and the 2 oaks, which were another $25K. So with the smaller claims, it went to about $500,000, $700,000. They had to move out, and we have now paid off the mortgage, done a lovely loft and kitchen conversion, and have basically done up the house and garden, as well as planted a 60-year-old sequoia tree in the back garden. We also had our kitchen counter and table made from the old sequoia. We now have a new lovely family living next to us, who we share chickens, ducks, and pygmy goats with. They are very nice, and I make a fortune babysitting their kids. I am working on spelling, punctuation, and grammar, but I am dyslexic, so please tell me where the errors are. Many of you wanted to hear about the court case, but she didn't stand a chance. As soon as we revealed the footage to her lawyer, she gave up. The people who cut the tree down gave us the countertops for free, as an apology. The neighbors had a second home, so they just sold the house and moved back to their smaller one. We feel bad for the elderly neighbors, but we do visit their graves because they were like family. I cannot show the footage from the wildlife camera, sorry, but I can show you footage we got of hedgehogs. Here is the link. I didn't know where to put it, so I put it on r/. Also, there was a storm, but the sequoia was unharmed. That's what the video showed.
Before I talk about today's posts, please consider subscribing to stay updated on more engaging content like this. Wow, these Reddit stories are just wild. First off, the grandma who left a debt in her will talk about a final twist. I love how she had that last laugh, especially with the, "You still owe me $14" line. It's crazy to think about the family dynamics and how much it must have meant to the OP. And the second story about the neighbor chopping down the tree, that's some next-level drama right there. The sheer audacity of thinking they could get away with it, and then getting hit with a $500,000 bill, it's insane. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these stories. Did you find them as entertaining as I did? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Voiced. If you enjoyed daily, high-quality stories, please like and subscribe to show your support.